Hi, everyone. I am Craig Maxwell. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Native Plant Society, along with Laura Domingo. For those of you that have not been to any of our meetings before or joining us on Zoom for the first time, we are the Sept Piedmont chapter of the Native Plant Society. If you are interested in joining our organization or getting membership, ncwildflower.org is our website. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram. This presentation was recorded and we'll be posting it on YouTube as well in the next week or so. And we will be sharing that out on Facebook. And if you joined on Zoom, we'll be sending you an email with that link as well. Joining us via Zoom. Today we have Georgann Eubanks with us here to talk about her book, Saving the Wild South. She is an author, an Emmy-winning documentarian. She's here to talk with us about several endangered species here in the South that many of us know about with our passion for native plants. But she also talks about solutions to address those and kind of put our mind at ease, hopefully, with a few things that we can do in our area. Thank you all for coming today. This is a very big group. I'm very excited we have this many people here. I believe we have a good bit of people online as well. And without further ado, I will have Georgann come up and present. Thank you all.
Okay, well, it's great to be with you all this afternoon. Thank you for coming out. The book came out in October of last year, and all the gigs that I've done to talk about the book, and there have been a lot, have been either virtual or starting at the beginning of the year. Often the first face-to-face, first time face-to-face meeting for organizations that have been not meeting. So it's great to be together. So I'm not a botanist, I'm a writer. And I wrote a book about North Carolina foods, which we have. And by the way, this is Donna Campbell, the photographer whose work you'll see in this presentation. We traveled together a lot. The first series of books that we did for UNC Press were actually on North Carolina literature and writers. And so I was in my home country with those three books, covered the whole state, developed tours where people could visit where writers have lived and worked and read excerpts of what they've written about North Carolina. So it was all about place. After we got over those three books, which took 10 years to do, we took a break. And then we said, oh, we missed the road. What can we do next? And we decided to eat our way across North Carolina. So we traveled the state. We picked a dozen foods that are sort of signature foods for North Carolina, important to our culture and identity as North Carolinians. The book starts with snow, which we make ice cream out of, and it ends with what? Oysters. Yeah, with soft shell crab somewhere in the middle and cantaloupe and ramps up in the mountains. So it was a lot of fun. But as we were doing that book, I began to learn about how some of these foods were endangered, that ramps were being poached and pulled up by the roots to be sold for fancy restaurants, that oysters were suffering from stormwater runoff, that soft-shell crab were somehow not flourishing at all. And I started thinking, wow, if we lose these foods, if we lose these plants and animals, we will have lost part of our identity, part of our culture, who we are as North Carolinians. And Southerners tend to be pretty into the weather, which is a big part of things, and we're into our plants. So I was lucky as a child to have grandparents and parents who were crazy for going to nurseries and buying new shrubbery and learning the names of plants. And this quote from George Eliot means a lot to me. We could never have loved the earth so well if we had had no childhood in it. If it were not the earth where the same flowers come up again every spring that we used to gather with our tiny fingers. We start as kids to care about nature. And that's one of the messages that I wanted to bring to you today about how important it is for us to help young people, we who are parents and grandparents or good friends to children, to make sure that they know about places like this. They come to visit and get comfortable in nature. So I got the idea of following sort of the same pattern as the food book to find the stories of a dozen endangered plants. And I wanted to go bigger than just North Carolina. I grew up in Georgia. We spent summer vacations in South Carolina and Florida. I love the North Carolina mountains. I have a log cabin in Little Switzerland. I love Tennessee. And so we broadened our scope to 6 states. And one of the first things I learned was that kids today have something called plant blindness, and some adults do too. We look at green and we just see green. We don't know the names or the leaves. We can't distinguish one plant from another. The term plant blindness was coined by a couple of botanists from the South who did a survey, and they found that kids particularly, especially in the digital age now, when we spend so much time looking at screens, that kids really pay attention to what moves, like the butterflies and the insects and the animals, but they don't know their plants. So we focus on the pretty moving things. What they discovered was that 77% of kids at graduation, they did a survey of a number of high school students, had never planted a plant by themselves. Another 10% had never picked fruit from a tree or a plant. And they didn't remember any children's story in which a plant was featured. So that means we've got some work to do. If we're going to save our environment, we've got some work to do helping kids appreciate the nature around us. So I went to Alan Weekly, who is probably the most prominent botanist in North Carolina and perhaps the South. He does census on plants, and he works at North Carolina Botanical Garden. For a long time, he was our heritage botanist in North Carolina, and I brought him a list of plants that I had studied and researched. I was looking to spread myself across the 6 states, and these red spots are where the plants that we went to visit are. We wanted not to put the plants in any danger by giving away their locations, and in some cases, there are species in the book that are so endangered you can only see them perhaps at a botanical garden. So we were very careful not to give away any secrets. The first, I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the plants in the book, and then I'm going to focus on 3 plants that I think have good stories for this geography. The Yadkin River goldenrod only grows right at this moment in August and September on the Yadkin River near the Alcoa plant on the banks of the Yadkin River. And it was discovered by a botanist named John K. Small, who was only in college when he and a buddy, Arthur Heller, came to North Carolina on the train in 1891, brought their sacks to collect specimens, and they went up to Blowing Rock and they hiked all over the Blue Ridge, and then they came down the mountain and they went to the Yadkin River. And John Small noticed this odd yellow goldenrod that was not like anything he'd ever seen, and he made a note of it in his notebook. And it eventually was named Solidago plumosa. It was listed in the literature, and then people forgot about it because it was only in this one place. And it was 100 years, almost to the day, when Alan Weekly was out in his job as North Carolina heritage botanist, and he had read John Small's notebooks. He found the goldenrod. And the other flower, the Heller's blazing star, is named for Heller, Arthur Heller, who was John Small's partner on this trip to North Carolina. And this blazing star, it's a liatris. It grows on Grandfather Mountain and in a couple of counties farther up around in Ashe County, and it's very rare. It's so rare that there are other species in this family that are used for cancer cures, but we can't test the properties of this plant because it's so rare. So that's the first chapter of the book. Here are the most recent pictures taken this year of the Yadkin River goldenrod blooming right on the banks of the Yadkin River. You all know Stanley County, that region. The Florida Toria tree is a crazy story. I loved this story. It's an ancient yew tree, and it grows only in the panhandle of Florida. It's been called gopher wood and stinking cedar. but it became the basis for a theme park in Florida. Of course it did, Florida. In the 1950s, this lay preacher and legislator who ran for governor and lost developed a theory that the Florida Toria tree was actually the wood that was used to build Noah's Ark. He also determined that the Garden of Eden was actually at the confluence of the Chattahoochee, Flint, and Apalachicola rivers, which happens to be where this tree is found. So he opened a theme park. It cost $1.10 to get in to see the trees. He put up signs quoting Bible verses. This is one: the leaves of gopher trees is a perfect design, conveying a special divine message. No other tree in the world has such a message. So he was pretty good. And here, ladies, on this natural operating table, God took a rib from Adam's side and made Mother Eve right here in Florida. And then here's the birthplace of Adam, conveniently located near the parking lot. So this tree has a fungus now, and its growth is stunted. And then Hurricane Michael a few years ago came straight up the Apalachicola River and dropped all the taller overstory trees on top of the Toria, and it's in a lot of trouble. So we got to go with a team from Atlanta Botanical Garden, and we should all be very proud of Atlanta Botanical Garden. They're doing work all over the South and even the Caribbean to restore endangered species. This team has planted new seedlings on private property so that it can be watched and maintained by the owners of the property who've committed to see if they can keep the Toria growing until they figure out a cure for the fungus, or it could go the way of the chestnut tree, the American chestnut. So this happy crowd, we carried equipment up steep slopes in the sand and found these little seedlings, and we planted seeds. And I really appreciate Donna sort of picked up creation story here in the Michelangelo genre. But that is a Toria seed. There were some planted that they had already planted that we found in the woods miraculously through GPS. So we got to see some coming up. Anyway, it's a species in the balance right now. We also went to an undisclosed site in Alabama. We had to swear secrecy. We only got compass points. We went out in the woods and met this guy. And we were a little nervous because we drove up to the site. He'd given us Google compass points, and we parked. And then here comes this big white truck, and it turned out to be our guide. But we were in the middle of nowhere in Alabama, but he was taking us to see the Alabama canebrake pitcher plant, which is gorgeous. And carnivorous plants are so popular with collectors, and they are poached around the world, and they are endangered largely by humans who are either developing land where these thrive, or they're stealing the plants. And in fact, the trafficking of rare plants and animals is the fourth largest criminal activity on the planet. Yeah. The green pitcher plant grows a little farther north in Alabama, and we had gone to the state park where they were. There is a site of them, and we tried to get the people at the state park to tell us where they were, and they wouldn't tell us because about 2 months before, a teacher and school kids had come to take a hike, and a week later, all the plants they had found were gone. So somebody had come back and poached the plants. Carnivorous plants is a long story, but they're fabulous and interesting. A plant that depends on animals to get its nourishment. This is Patrick Thompson and Noah Yon at the Auburn University, the Donald Davis Arboretum. They have in those two trays more of the green pitcher plants than are left in the wild. So only 6,000 plants left of the green pitchers, and they're growing them at the Arboretum in Auburn to try to preserve them. And Noah Yon was a great reason to hope for the future. He's the only botany student in his class at Auburn. He's going to be he's going to be Alan Weakley's successor. He's an amazing young man. So we need more young people to take an interest in this. Moorfield's leatherflower grows in Alabama, and it was discovered by a sophomore in college in the 70s. No, in the 80s. He came home to Huntsville, Alabama to see his family. His father worked for NASA, the rocket business. He was working on the space shuttle, I believe. And this young man went out and started hiking all over the mountains north of Huntsville, and he found this clematis, or clematis, depending on how you say it. And it's an unusual, I always knew those flowers as being the saucer shaped that you plant on your mailbox and they grow up in a beautiful vine. But these are like little pitchers, and they like to grow on rocks and climb high. And Jim Moorfield, thank you, Donna. Jim Moorfield found this specimen, took it to a professor at Vanderbilt, showed it to him, and he said, I think you've got something here. And Jim was so hooked on botany by that time that he finished college, got into graduate school, was about to enroll in his PhD program in California when he learned that the Moorfield leatherflower named for him had been presented to the world. And he was starting grad school with a plant, a species named for him. Great story. He's the heritage botanist about to retire in Nevada. There is an herbarium specimen of the leatherflower, and these two young people were another cause for hope. Students prepared to go into the field. In fact, Lillian had decided as a sophomore to get her PhD in botany, and these guys are at Sewanee, the University of the South, where they have a wonderful botany program as well. The bad news is, though, that plant blindness has really caused there to be a decline in the number of students who get involved in botany in colleges. And so the funds available to support those programs are declining. When faculty retire, as it happened at Auburn, they don't replace them. So botany as a discipline is in trouble around the world because of our fascination with screens. River cane, I wanted to bring to you today because it used to be everywhere in the South. It is not an invasive bamboo. It is a native bamboo to the South. And it was so ubiquitous. The early botanists like Bartram write about running into literally walls of river cane. And river cane is very important to 6 species of butterflies, a whole bunch of small mammals, birds, and we've now destroyed the river cane that was here. There's only 2% left in the South of what used to be here. People used to feed their horses with it. They would dig it up. Cattle would eat it, and then they would clear the fields. And the thing about river cane is that it's really great as a windshield. In other words, it stops the wind if you plant it along the edge of your garden or your field. It's a flood mitigator, and it's also a carbon sink. So it can be planted and contained and used strategically to help us with climate change. It looks sort of like squirrel tail. Now, there's bamboo out there that's not native, but this is the native river cane. There's the seeds that come from river cane, but it only produces seeds about every 30 years, which is strange. The native people used to grind this seed and make flour. Animals love to eat the seed, but river cane actually grows by rhizomes underground. Here is some river cane that's interrupted with invasive species like autumn olive, and they are working on the Hiawassee. This is the Hiawassee in Tennessee, by removing these invasive plants and hoping to let the river cane flourish. But invasive plants are a problem because it takes so much labor to remove them, and poison is not good, right? So trying to kill the invasive plants doesn't always work. But these were reliable hunting spots for Native Americans. They knew they would find animals if they could find a patch of river cane. This is a species that's in trouble that depends on river cane, and you can find this little booklet online if you're a birder and you're interested to learn more. But there's another story related to river cane, and that is our Cherokee folks in Tennessee and North Carolina have been making baskets for thousands of years made from river cane. They're very talented at it. It's a delicate process to split the canes and to get strips that you can weave these baskets. So we went and we met with this woman, Ramona Lossie, who is one of the elders who learned the craft from her mother and grandmother and is now teaching as many young Cherokee as possible. But the problem is there's not enough river cane of the right size and strength around Cherokee for them to keep up the art form. They actually have a treaty with a college in Barberville, Kentucky, where they go every year to get their supply of river cane. But here's what Ramona told me. River cane was a good babysitter and teacher when I was a child. My sister and I would sit around while my mom was weaving. You learn what you see. I learned to put my things in order for weaving. I learned to count in the Cherokee language with my grandma as part of the weaving. You're raised a certain way, and it shows in respect for your elders. My girls were raised this way too, and both of them are artists. It's not a bad thing to be disciplined by your elders. Little Native kids don't scream. That's because our elders were soft-spoken. You learn to put yourself and your stories in your weaving. No need to growl on anyone. No loud noises. She was great. And all these pieces behind her in the Qualla Boundary Museum, a great many of them were woven by her elders that she learned from. And these are Ramona's baskets, and they fit in the palm of your hand. So with the shortage of river cane, she's learned to weave these incredible patterns in this tiny form, and she says nothing is wasted. Pretty cool. Okay, we come to Schwannet Sunflower, your special endangered species in Charlotte, Mecklenburg. What an interesting story it is. So it grows in South Carolina, across the border. It grows in North Carolina. It is a very hardy plant. In fact, a fellow from the Catawba River Conservancy told me that Schweinitz Sunflower just loves bad soil. It loves to grow on the side of the road where it gets mowed. But unfortunately, it gets sprayed a lot on the side of the road. But it thrives most when it's burned. And I know you all know about plants that thrive from burning, which was a tradition of Native people to burn a field and let it come back gloriously and release the seeds in the seed bank underground. Well, we don't do that anymore because we're afraid of traffic jams and people running into each other if the smoke is flying across the road. So that's a problem. These plants enjoy disturbance. They also, of course, are great pollinators. And this is the prime time of year to see it blooming. And I heard you're going to have that field trip. So here is the area around the Catawba and Wateree rivers where you can find a good bit of Schweinitz sunflower. And in fact, it was a species adopted by the Catawba tribe. And they are now trying to repatriate or matriate this plant into their food culture. It's part of their food sovereignty. Why? Because the roots of the Schwannet sunflower are a lot like Jerusalem artichoke. And the research suggests that the Catawba Indians used to rely on this root as a food source. So it's kind of like sunchokes, edible, very edible. But because it's an endangered species, you can't eat them right now. This is a young man named Delaslan George Warren. He is of the Catawba tribe. He lives on the reservation. He went to Vanderbilt where he studied opera, and he was then a John Lewis Fellow and did graduate work in Copenhagen. He's a brilliant young man who came home to learn the Catawba language. The last living speaker of the Catawba language died in the 1960s. He's teaching himself the language, and in turn, he's teaching it to students on the reservation. He is also teaching them to garden, which is wonderful. So here's the garden on the res near the cultural center that when we visited, it was fall, so things were waning, but you can see, recognize some familiar plants. He teaches them about everything: gourds, beans, flowers, and the Schweinitz Sunflower. He also grew corn and taught the kids about corn while he's teaching them to speak the native language. The Georgia aster grows on the reservation, which was an endangered species in Georgia that has been brought back, one of those success stories. And the Schwannet Sunflower will grow very well on the reservation, but they're trying to get permission to grow enough to be able to harvest it. But the reservation is federal land, therefore the species is protected by federal law, so they can't plant it on the reservation. They have to plant it on private property to be able to harvest it and eat it. So it's kind of crazy. But this, you may know this area up near Latta. This was on land once cultivated by enslaved people. It was called the Mccoy Farm, and the Catawba Land Conservancy, when they found a few sunflowers, immediately set aside this property to protect the sunflower, and you can just drive right by and see them. I know y'all have secret locations too. You don't tell people where they are, or at least that's what I heard. Yeah. Right.
So there's secret, yes.
Right, got it. Yeah, that's bad. So Louis David von Schweinitz, we had a couple of people asking me mushroom questions. I am not a mushroom expert, but he was like a total fungi nut. And he moved from Germany with his family, lived in Salem, was a Moravian preacher. He would ride his horse to preach to different communities around North Carolina. But everywhere he went, what he really did was mushroom. He would ride on his horse and look for mushrooms. And he collected them. He was an expert at drawing them and painting them. His artwork is in the UNC collection now in Chapel Hill. He was a well-respected preacher and scientist. And in fact, he was invited to become the president of UNC when he was living in Salem. And he said, that's just too big a ride, I should say. So he turned down UNC, but he was friends with Mitchell of Mount Mitchell fame. And he accomplished a lot. He even discovered cannabis in Forsyth County, wild cannabis. So his story is good. And for those of you who are interested in mushrooms, look up his history because it's very interesting. And then the shoals spider lily.
Could you go back one slide? I
Yes.
just want to type his name in.
Sure. Yeah, boy, I had to type it in and correct it a million times doing this book. Schweinitz. SCH.
Okay.
Yeah, got it. Okay. So you all probably know about the shoals lilies that bloom on the Catawba River. Actually, in South Carolina is where you can see the big explosion, 30 acres of these gorgeous flowers. There is what it looks like when they are in bloom. And what's interesting is they're not endangered, because it's pretty hard to take a legislator to see this and say, oh, we need to, these are endangered, because they come up every year in about 3 or 4 rivers across the South. But there used to be many, many, many more, and in tributaries. Donna took this picture in May a few years ago when we saw them and were just wowed. And I think it was the Catawba was named the most endangered river in America in 2006. And about 2 weeks after this, 100,000 gallons of sewage spilled upstream and came down the Catawba. You hear those stories all the time. Duke Energy manages the flow of the water from the impoundments that create Lake Norman and Catawba Lake and all those Mountain Island. So our lilies sometimes are underwater because they decide to release water from the dam. They only bloom between Mother's Day and Father's Day. And this is very close to the Catawba Reservation land as well. So they are not endangered, but the man that did the research to try to get them on the endangered list lives in Alabama. And we went to visit him. This is a tributary of it's Hatchet Creek, which is a tributary of, I believe, the Black Warrior River. And they bloom there in profusion. They only allow 100 kayaks on the river when they are in bloom on this tributary. Alabama only has one river that has no impoundments, and that is the Cahaba River. There's the location of Hatchet Creek, if you know Alabama at all, kind of in the middle of the state. So this little town, West Blockton, Alabama, we went to visit. Population 1,240. You can see there's not a lot of commerce. There is a restaurant called the Tiger Hut. There is a shade tree mechanic, and about 25 miles down the road, there's a Mercedes plant. And they employ a lot of people from West Blockton, Alabama, but they used to be a coal mining town that shut up business during the Depression. We found that this is, however, the locus of the Cahaba River Society. The Cahaba River flows just 4 miles west of town, and the river was high on this day. You can see it. It was, I think, February when we went to visit. You cannot even see the rocks. But the Cahaba doesn't have impoundments, and this is a shoals area, Hargrove Shoals. Approximately a third of the lilies on the planet bloom here. We met Lisa Buck, who's a high school teacher, now retired, in West Blockton, and she took us to see the river. And she is also on the Cahaba River Society, the lily group in town. This is their Cahaba Lily Center downtown. And in it is memorabilia from the coal mining days, from everything that's ever happened in West Blockton. But once a year, in the middle of May, they invite anybody who wants to come to their lily celebration, and it's a big deal, and has put West Blockton on the map. It brings tourists to town. Actually, this is Miss Myrtle Jones. She came to West Blockton in 1955 to teach Alabama history and social studies, and she was the founder of the West Blockton Improvement Committee that began this idea of a festival. It's been going on now for 30 years.
Spelled the town's name.
Blockton, Blockton, no K.
As what are impoundments?
Those are dams.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So here's just an example of their amazing displays that they have, and school children come to visit. This used to be a department store, then it was a church, and now it's the Lily Center in town. Miss Myrtle had this plate in her china cabinet that she showed us, and it says lilies on the Cahaba, and you turn it over and it says, these beautiful and rare species of lilies are growing and blooming in profusion on lily shoals in the Cahaba River in Bibb County, Alabama. That's the smallest county in Alabama. This particular variety of lily is found only in 2 other rivers in the world, the Amazon in Brazil and the Seine in France. That's baloney. So this was quite a commemorative item. This is Larry Davenport, who did all the research to study the lily and to make the argument for why it should be endangered. He lost 2 cameras and nearly drowned. And he finally found a scientist to help him find the pollinator for the lily. And it's a moth that comes at night, a sphinx moth. And they had to go out at midnight with flashlights and stand in the river and, figure this out. But he couldn't convince, well, he finally got his paper together to present to the feds, and they declared a moratorium on any more endangered species that year. So the lily never became endangered, but West Blockton when people found out that it was growing in West Blockton, they started coming there and trying to poach the lily out of the river, pull up the bulbs, take them home. They only grow in moving water on rocks. You can't put them in your backyard. So the town of West Blockton passed an ordinance to stop lily poaching, and now the local police can catch people if they mess with the lilies. So it shows that preservation can be local. You know, enactment of protecting endangered species can be a local phenomenon. They also had it declared a federal wildlife area, and this is a viewing platform up above the shoals so that when it blooms, people who can't get down by the river can come up here and have a look. It's been, the lilies have been painted in Alabama over and over. This is by an artist from England. And they have a cookbook of favorite dishes from the lily celebration, including Larry's favorite cocktail wieners, which the recipe is kind of scary, but it says if he's going to be present at the celebration, you should double the recipe. But there is also now a Cahaba Lily Society out of Birmingham. This little town of West Blockton is just south of Birmingham. The river starts up around Birmingham and flows down. And they have begun to really take care of the watershed and work to preserve the native fish species, the snail species. It's become a movement in Alabama. It's pretty exciting. And this is LaTanya Scott, who is the educator for the Cahaba Lily Society. And she's been bringing kids from Birmingham, downtown Birmingham. She said she had one boy who said, "I've never touched a tree before." These are kids who don't get out in nature. And so she's bringing them down to the river and teaching them about the snails and the water and what dams do to mess up water systems. And she's just an incredible young woman. And now the Cahaba River group is talking about the people shed. So they're not just talking about the watershed, but the people who live around the river and trying to make sure everybody knows the value of this resource. And the lilies are a pretty dramatic example of why it's so valuable. So they have that. Unfortunately, the Cahaba River is the place where the guys that plotted to create the Birmingham bombing went under a bridge in Birmingham at the Cahaba River to plot this disaster that happened. You remember the Birmingham bombing of Sunday school children, African-American Sunday school children. So this bridge has a terrible history. So the Cahaba River is a source of fear for some people in Alabama. And so they're overcoming that stigma by getting kids down to the river and to understand it's not to be feared, it's to be treasured. So here's Donna and I just went in this May to see Lisa Buck again, and she took us out on the river. We walked in our water shoes with poles, and it was pretty swift, but we got up close enough to really smell the beautiful perfume of this flower and to come close enough to understand this other wonderful thing of the metaphor of ephemerality that this flower has. So it only blooms between Mother's Day and Father's Day, and each bloom only lasts a day. So if you look at this picture, you can see yesterday's and the day before and today and the ones that are coming after it. And this lily will be prolific, but it teaches you about how quick beauty goes away. And there's Miss Myrtle's dog, Maxie, and he made it in the book. He was mentioned in the book. And when we went back to see her, she's now 97, 95. She was so glad to see us. She bought 10 copies of the book for all of her grandchildren, great-grandchildren. But what she was really excited about was that Maxie is in the book. So Donna took this picture, and we have Maxie as our mascot now for the Saving the Wild South. So we had a wonderful adventure. We learned a lot about endangered plants. We learned that each of us can do a little something, and maybe that's making our lawns a little smaller or planting clover instead of grass. It's about not spraying when so I was raised with that automatic, go shoot it with spray, not to spray. Help young people know more about plants, take them to the Reedy Creek Nature Center, take them to the Botanical Garden south of town. Support scholarships. If you really care about our future, there are a lot of kids who need scholarship help to be able to study plants, botany. Noah Yawn, the fellow I mentioned who's working with the pitcher plants, he learned about carnivorous plants when he was a kid. His grandmother gave him his first Venus flytrap when he was 8. He said he fed it hamburger and it died. But then he got into pitcher plants, and he was raised by a single mother, and he's been completely dependent on scholarships to do his studies. And boy, is he given back for that gratitude. So the other thing is my friend Jarrett Daniel, who's a butterfly specialist at the University of Florida, he said, plant a billboard in your yard, meaning plant bee balm or other pollinators in profusion. Don't just plant 1 or 2, plant a billboard, and you'll have butterflies and other bees and insects visiting your house. So that's what I want to leave you all with. The native plants are so precious and important, and we need to protect them. And I'm still learning. My next book is going to be about places you can visit and have some of these experiences with native plants and animals. So that's kind of it. Questions? We have time?
Yeah, we don't have any questions online just yet.
Okay.
As far as the failure to get the lily listed as endangered, what year was that, and have they tried again?
They haven't tried again. It was 80, I want to say 86. You could find it in the book. No, they haven't. But it grows they grow on the Broad River and the Flint River, and a tributary of the Savannah River, and then the Cahaba and a couple of little tributaries there, and then of course the Catawba. And so what Larry said was, you can hardly take somebody to see it and convince them it's in trouble, because they're in such profusion when they do bloom. And when they're not blooming, there's nothing there. So I'm not sure that our laws are the best, doing the best service anyway. I'm very proud of West Blockton for doing what they're doing. And I think any of us in any community, where we live, if there is a native plant, you guys have done it with the Schweinitz. And I mentioned that in my talks, that, adopt a plant and make it part of your identity, your community identity. It says a lot good about the community that would do that. Yes, ma'am.
How do you
They do produce seed, but basically it gets caught in the crevices between the rocks. And believe me, that these shoals, at least in Alabama, were quite tricky to even navigate when we were walking. But they do get caught unlike a swamp lily, which floats, these sink. The seeds and the bulbs sink, or the bulbs grow out of the seeds. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I'm curious when you said, trafficking of plants
And animals.
and animals is 4th largest
Mm-hmm.
in the world.
Yes.
I'm hoping that our agencies know this and are their plans for the future.
There are global agencies that are tracking and working on this, and some of them are named in the book. It's the other things ahead of it are human trafficking, drugs, and what's the other, Donna? Do you remember? I can't remember. I never remember all 3. But anyway, there is an agency, a global agency, the United Nations and some other groups, but it so much depends on countries. There are black markets in countries. It's an I think it's an Eastern European country where pitcher plants are often found, the exotic ones. And bless his heart, Noah Yawn, the young man, regularly patrols Facebook and eBay trying to find people who are illegitimately offering these plants for sale and reporting them.
Once a plant is listed,
Yeah.
what is the process if you want to try to promote it on your own private property?
Huh.
Assume
that's a-
there's a process.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I think you can, in fact, you know, the Atlanta Botanical Garden has been very effective in getting people who have land where the plants already are. In the case of the pitcher plants, they did a census in northern Alabama and they found where the like 6 sites that are left for those Alabama canebrake pitcher plants. And one of them was on private property. And they went to visit the people. Sometimes people say, get off, you know, is the government coming to take my property, right? That's what they think. But Noah went and explained to them, the plants didn't look good. It was the off season for the plants. He explained to them, these are really important plants. And they go, what's so great about them? They're ugly. So he got passes for them to go to the Atlanta Botanical Garden and see those thriving plants. And now they are signed on to protect. All of us can sign on to protect. And if we connect with a local botanical garden or Atlanta Botanical Garden and offer to be a site where things can be planted and monitored, if it's a critical need and your land is right for it, you can do it. But you have to work with an agency that's engaged in the conservation or in the planting. There's another story in the book about a Michaud's sumac, named after Michaud, who traveled the South and identified many plants. There were female plants of the sumac under a water tower in Newton County, Georgia, and male plants on the banks of the Broad River, and they were dying because they didn't have each other. And so on Valentine's Day, this very clever Department of Natural Resources guy got all kinds of publicity and brought the University of Georgia, and they put the males and females together, and they're now thriving. So, you know, sometimes it's getting the media involved, getting publicity, and being clever enough to figure out how to do that. But if you have, I don't know about this organization or the botanical gardens south of town might be a good place to ask. Schweinitz is pretty endangered. It's planted at the zoo, the North Carolina Zoo now. It comes up randomly in the Uwaris because the overstory opens up and suddenly the Schweinitz comes out of the ground. We don't know where all the seed banks are, but they're still there underground if they're given the right conditions.
Are there seeds available for us to buy and plant?
I don't know.
It seems like that would be a really good idea if you want to propagate it. People like us want to, you know, carefully, you know, give seeds to people like us and see if we can
Yeah.
grow it in our yard.
We have to have the right soil, the right.
Yeah, it's really rotten soil.
For that particular.
They grow well. Yeah, they grow under power lines very well.
When you say monitored, are you talking about people from it, like a agency or a group coming out to monitor that plant on your property?
Yeah, so in the case of the Toria tree, the Atlanta Botanical Garden is pretty sure that the fungus travels wherever they take the seeds. The fungus is going to be there. And there's another group that started planting them in the North Carolina mountains, and some of them are living, but they also have the fungus. And the danger of planting things that are carrying something, you know, could destroy other plants. I think the sunflower is pretty innocuous, but some plants could be very harmful to other native plants. So that's part of why it's controlled. I suspect the sunflower is probably not a big threat. That's just my gut. I think the first thing to do, and you can do this online, is do as much research as you can about a plant that you think would be of interest to help, and read the reports. Each plant has a fish and wildlife person who's in charge of maintaining or monitoring the plant where in its locations, and they have a 5-year plan for trying to protect and increase the population. And they have specific plans, you know, and goals to set within that 5-year plan. And if those goals aren't met, they would have to do another 5-year plan. It's federal government. But learn as much as you can and then go to the nearest botanical garden or university, I'd say university, where you might find some guidance on that. I think every plant is different and every plant has its champions. And again, that issue of planting it in the wrong place or putting it out with other plants that it could harm is a big concern, I know, for the Atlanta Botanical Garden. So they're working in Florida on big tracts of land that are in harmony and adjacent to where the Torreya grows, but they're planting them in places that they're pretty much isolated from other plants. And the chestnut tree died because of a blight that came over on a boat. And it's interesting, Florida was the place where one guy, David Fairchild, who became the plant explorer, traveled the world, collected seeds, brought them all to Florida, and tried to make them grow here. A lot of them were things we love, like avocados and oranges and other plants that have been naturalized, but a whole lot of invasives. Florida is second only to Hawaii in the number of invasives and endangered plants because of that importation.
I have one question online. In your experience, has there been any type of state that you think is more stressed than other things versus gosh?
More under stress. That's a hard one to answer. I think that there's a very interesting organization called the Southeastern Grasslands Institute. It's headquartered at Austin Peay University in Tennessee, and they are trying to determine where there were grasslands in our history, and we've let forests grow up, and we think forests are a virtue, and they are a virtue, but in some places we've left out the meadows and the grasslands and put those down to postage stamps. And so we're losing plants that have been shut out by the overstory. I mean, Alabama is the classic with all the paper, the pine trees, the pine plantations. We have them in Eastern North Carolina too, where once there was clear land and meadows, and now these trees are planted so close together that no light gets to the understory, and quail are endangered, and there are a lot of people working on quail because they want to hunt them. But so, there are a million examples. I don't know how to pick the worst. Stressed. Yeah. I'm a writer. I'm doing this out of passion to try to get people like me to go learn more. And I'm still learning, and I hope you will too. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you to everybody who joined on Zoom. Thank you everybody who came here today. In my excitement to get things started early, I forgot just a few announcements. So thank you all for joining us today. Thank you everybody on Zoom who joined.